It's quite shocking to me, honestly, to have all student visas paused this way. This is when a lot of people will be applying because many classes start in August. We've always tried to make things as easy as possible for student visa applicants because the State Department has always understood the importance of international exchange and the benefits that international students bring, including economic ones.
Welcome to the very first episode of the Diplomacy Podcast, where we explore how diplomacy shapes our world and our lives. I am Nicholas Kralev, founder and executive director of the Washington International Diplomatic Academy, the only independent practical diplomacy school in the world. The motto of the Academy and this podcast is "Diplomacy is the world's best hope." I hope you agree, and if you don't, we'll have to change your mind. As many international students face uncertainty about their visas and status in the United States, whether they're inside or outside the country, we provide clarification on how the US visa system works and what the students and their families should keep in mind as they face the current challenges. My guest is Ambassador Janice Jacobs, one of the instructors of our academy. Ambassador Jacobs spent 3 decades in the US Foreign Service, most recently as Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs. She was also Ambassador to Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, Deputy Chief of Mission in the Dominican Republic, and also served in Nigeria, Thailand, France, Mexico, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Ambassador, first, welcome. It's very good to see you. Let me ask you first to clarify the basics about student visas. We have these 3 categories, J, F, and M. Can you briefly explain to us what the difference is between those, J, F, and M?
Thank you. I would be happy to. The F visa is the most common one, and that visa is issued to an international student who is coming here for a full course of study. It involves getting a Form I-20 from the university that the student will attend, having an interview at an embassy or consulate, and then getting the visa and traveling to the United States. The M visa is not as common as the F1. The M visa is for people coming for vocational training, not for academic study. The J visa is for exchange visitors, for people coming here to participate in various approved programs where they are not necessarily studying, but learning about the United States, its institutions, its ways in general.
Determining whether someone gets a J or an F is based on the institution they're going to, right? Whether it's a university or another type of organization. I've known examples of one university giving some students a J and others an F.
It's quite possible that the same organization or institution could be authorizing, an F visa or a J visa. It just depends on the program in the United States.
Once someone is approved to be a student, the university has to send that student a form that they use then to apply for a visa in their passport. For F visas, that form is an I-20. For J visas, that's an I-66, right? And so the university has the right, as part of the system that they participate in, run by DHS, to issue that I-20 or I-66 to the student. And then the student has to present that to the embassy or consulate. And on the basis of that, they will be issued a visa in their passport. As you always say to our students, the visa does not guarantee that you will be admitted into the United States, right? The visa gives you the right to come and knock on the door.
Exactly.
Right? You can get on the plane. You can land in the United States. This is when you are now in the hands of DHS. In particular, the part of DHS called CBP, Customs and Border Protection. And the officer who takes your passport, who scans your fingerprints and takes your picture, that is the person that has the discretion to admit you or not admit you into the United States, right?
That's correct.
What would be the reason not to accept you if you have a valid visa?
There could be several reasons. The State Department shares the information from our visa interview with the inspector at the port of entry. If something has dramatically changed in the circumstances, or perhaps a crime has been committed in between the time the person got the visa and travels, an inspector might look into the system and decide that the person is inadmissible. It is the responsibility of the inspector at the port of entry to determine whether the student is admissible to the United States. For students, the length of time that is allowed for that person to remain is usually duration of status. And what that means is that as long as that individual student remains a full-time student, meeting all the terms of the visa that was issued, the person is authorized to be in the U.S. There's often much confusion because it's very common for people to say that someone has overstayed their visa. And as you mentioned, the visa is simply allowing you to travel to the United States, to request entry into the United States. Once you're here, you are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security. And so if someone has been here, say that Homeland Security gave them 6 months to stay, which is very common for tourists and other visitors. But you stay beyond that. You have overstayed the authorized stay that DHS approved. You haven't overstayed your visa. The visa is simply for traveling to the United States. And that, I think it's very important for people to understand that, because there is a lot of confusion with that expression, overstaying visas.
In many countries, travelers often receive visas for 10 years, right? The multiple entry visa for 10 years. So if you come to the United States in year 1, that doesn't mean you can stay for 10 years, right? It means you can stay for the 6 months that the officer at the airport has given you, and you have to leave. Now, you can come back after a certain time and then get another 6 months, right? But you cannot assume that you can stay for the 10 years. So in fact, when I was hearing that this Egyptian national who committed this crime in Colorado the other week had overstayed his visa, well, first of all, we don't know how long his visa was for. Was it for 5 years or for 10 years? We don't know, right? No, he didn't overstay his visa. He overstayed the 6 months, assuming that was what it was given to him. Now, with students, there is some nuance here. With a student, typically the 20 or I-66 form on which basis the visa will be issued may in fact have an expiration date 4 years from now or more, right? Because the course of study for which the student has been admitted by the university is a 4-year bachelor's degree or 2-year master's degree or a 4 or 5-year PhD. And so if your visa is given to you for 4 or 5 years with multiple entries, this is done so students can come and go. They're not having to get a new visa every time they leave the United States, correct?
That's exactly right. They are free to go home, visit family, come back to the United States as many times as they want, as long as they maintain their student status.
So this is important. They have to maintain their status, whether it's as an F student or as a J student. And this is maintained in that system, right, that is managed by DHS. And so, at least theoretically, if someone drops out of school and the university updates that system and says that this person has not enrolled this semester, then DHS has the right to revoke the status of the student. Now, what happens to the visa? Does the visa also have to be deliberately revoked? And if it's not, can that student come back on the same visa later on?
Right. Usually the two will go together. If the DHS determines that they're no longer in status, the State Department will be asked to revoke the visa and to prevent that person from being able to come back. But a very important distinction here. In the news, we hear a lot right now about visas being revoked for people who are in the United States. If you are still overseas and you have not traveled yet and your visa is revoked, then the State Department makes an effort to notify you that the visa has been revoked. We try to do that so that the person doesn't travel. There will be information in DHS's database that shows that a visa has been revoked. So if that person still overseas does travel, once they get to a port of entry in the United States, they will not be allowed to enter because they no longer have a valid visa. They no longer have a valid travel document. Now, if they are in the United States, they are no longer under the jurisdiction of the State Department. So the State Department may say, and has said over the past few weeks, that they have revoked a number of student visas. Really, all that means is that when that particular student leaves the United States, he or she will not be able to come back in because the visa has been revoked. What the Department of Homeland Security will do is once a visa is revoked, is then they will normally automatically revoke the authorized stay in the United States. So they sort of go hand in hand. A visa revoked in the U.S., DHS will respond by determining that the status is no longer valid and the person should leave or be deported.
Is it reasonable to assume that if a student's status is cancelled or revoked, the DHS in fact will inform that student?
I'm not sure what DHS's policy is on that. I know from the State Department perspective, we do expect our consular officers, whenever possible, to inform someone when their visa has been revoked. I'm not sure if DHS has the same requirement or procedure.
If they are in the United States, then the US Embassy in their home country is not going to call them because they're already here.
That's correct.
And typically, if your status is revoked as a student, is it, leave tomorrow, or is it you have a few weeks?
I think you do have a certain amount of time to leave, I'm not sure exactly what the length of time is, but, there would be a reasonable amount of time for you to pack up your things and make arrangements to return home. But I do think that the Department of Homeland Security expects you to depart as soon as possible.
Okay, so now let's turn to the Harvard case, because it's even more complicated. There are many students who are considering transferring because they're not sure whether, in fact, Harvard will still be able to enroll international students in the fall. There are students already in this country, and there are many who are not in this country, whether they're supposed to be freshmen this coming school year or they've left for the summer. So let's talk first about the students from Harvard who are currently in the United States. They thought that they would not be able to re-enroll this coming semester. However, a judge has prevented the executive order that was signed a couple of weeks ago, in fact, to go into effect. So as of now, they still have their status. They are in the United States. What would you advise those students who currently do have the status, the legal status of students? Should they be looking to transfer to another university? Should they be comfortable enough that they will be okay this coming semester?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think the best course of action right now is for students to remain where they are until the courts make a final decision about, what has been proposed for Harvard accepting international students. They need to wait for the whole issue to go through the courts for a decision. We're asking international students to live with a lot of uncertainty, which is quite unfortunate. Some of them, I understand, are just transferring to other schools. Some are staying just to see how things play out. I understand that some have actually returned home because they just don't feel welcome anymore, which I think is extremely unfortunate. So the best advice I can give, and really all of us are sort of having to play wait and see to see what the courts are going to decide on these various cases that have been brought to them.
They do decide to transfer. How does this work technically? You're on status that has been sponsored by Harvard. Your I-20 has been issued by Harvard.
Right.
And if that's revoked, then you need this other university where you're going to issue another I-20, but you don't have to leave the country, do you?
You shouldn't have to leave the country. No. We talked a little bit about the system that Department of Homeland Security has. It's called the SEVIS system, and schools are supposed to constantly update that database with the status of the international students. So that particular situation where someone transfers from one school to another, it would be very important for the schools to register that in the system so that DHS is seeing that everything is being done according to procedures. But the person should be able to, as you said, get another I-20 and transfer to another school if accepted without any problem, as long as the SEVIS database is updated.
If they leave the country, do they need to get another visa even if the previous one has not expired because now the sponsoring university is different?
Yes, they would have to get another F visa based on the new I-20. Yes.
Because the original one essentially has been revoked.
Because they're no longer going to that school. So yes, it would have to be updated.
Okay. So what if a student has gone home for the summer or is supposed to be a freshman in the fall and they are currently abroad? If they're new students and they don't have visas yet, currently no embassy or consulate is issuing student visas because they've been ordered by the State Department to pause any interviews, right? And considering any applications until they figure out how to scrub social media to look at those students past what they've been saying and all that. So right now you cannot get an appointment for a student visa, whether you go to Harvard or any other school, right? Until that is resolved, essentially these students are in limbo.
That is exactly right. People who had appointments before this pause in student visas occurred, they can go ahead and keep the appointment, but no new interviews are being accepted at this point. The Department of Homeland Security figures out exactly what type of vetting of social media platforms is going to be required.
In all your decades in the Foreign Service, have you been in a situation where all visa appointments for students have been paused?
No. I have never experienced that. When I was Assistant Secretary for Consular Affairs, I made it a requirement that our visa processing posts overseas give priority to students and exchange visitors. If there were long waiting times for interviews, they should always try to have a shorter wait time for students because we understood students have a program here that starts on a certain date. They need to be here at the beginning of a semester. They need to travel in a timely way. So we always made it a priority. It's quite shocking to me, honestly, to have all student visas paused this way. This is when a lot of people will be applying because many classes start in August. You're allowed to apply for a student visa 120 days before the start date of classes. Of course, you can't enter the United States until 30 days before your classes, but we've always tried, again, to make things as easy as possible for student visa applicants because the State Department has always understood the importance of international exchange and the benefits that international students bring, including economic ones. They contribute well over $40 billion every year to our economy here. The best thing for students who are overseas, who have a visa, they're ready to come for their course of study, is to check with the school that has accepted them before getting on the airplane, just to make sure that everything is okay for them to travel. That would be my best advice.
And finally, on the question of the Chinese students in particular, who apparently are now being targeted for reasons that have nothing to do with the universities they attend, right? It has to do with their home country. And it doesn't sound as if every Chinese student's visa will be revoked, but it does sound like a lot of them will be. We're talking about not necessarily only students who study certain subjects at school, but we're talking about their links with the Communist Party in China. Do you have any advice for a student like that?
Well, I will say that for many, many years, even before 9/11, there were additional checks and additional vetting of people coming here to study in sensitive areas, whether it was the transfer of sensitive technology, whatever it might be. Even if someone was coming to attend a conference where a sensitive issue was going to be discussed, those applicants, visa applicants, were always vetted. And once they were cleared, the different agencies and involved back here in the United States would have agreed that, it's okay for the person to come. That has been in place for a long time. Adding on ties to the Communist Party, we need to be clear about this. In China, in order to work certain jobs, in order to study at universities, there are many reasons why people have to join the Communist Party. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are fully participating members and attending meetings and all of that. So now to say that anyone who has ties to the Communist Party can no longer, get a student visa is going to be very difficult. It's going to impact a lot of people. My advice at this point would be to follow the news, follow the statements coming out from the State Department or the White House about any new measures or restrictions that are in place. The consular sections, I'm quite certain, are trying to understand all of these new requirements as well in order to implement what is being asked. So it's just as with many of these issues, I think it's just a question of waiting and seeing what happens.
Yes, that's where we are. And it is what it is, as they say. But it's certainly very unusual to be in this situation, including for consular officers abroad. Before we go, let me ask you just generally about what we call non-immigrant visas. By the way, let me point out something. Student visas, or even the work visas, are non-immigrant visas. Just because you have the right to live in the United States as a student or a worker does not mean you're an immigrant. These are non-immigrant visas. Green card is the shorthand for saying immigrant visas. Those can be obtained through marriage or through employment, but students and workers are non-immigrants. So the waiting times, which have been the subject of many stories in the media, especially since COVID, because we had a huge backlog. And it was taking, in some countries, 1 or 2 years to get an interview for a non-immigrant visa. And that has changed. Fewer people now want to come to the United States, whether it's tourists, workers, students. You have a better idea than I do about the wait times. But from what I understand anecdotally from several posts that I've spoken to recently overseas, the wait times have been reduced in some countries dramatically. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did have a significant backlog after the pandemic, and those wait times have been whittled down now. Just to give you an example of some of our larger posts, London, which used to have, I think, at least a year's wait before an interview could be scheduled. Right now, for a visitor visa B1, B2, it's a 3-month wait. Mexico City, which also had very long wait times after the pandemic for a B1, B2 visa. Right now, it's 8 months. So there has been a significant reduction in wait times. You see the confusion that some of these policies are causing here in the United States. It's very important to keep in mind that the State Department, the Bureau of Consular Affairs, has to try to make as much legal sense out of all of the new proclamations and executive orders in order to issue guidance to overseas posts on what they should be doing and how to do it. And that takes a while. Imagine, given the number of posts that we have, and when things are very fluid and changing almost daily, it is important to remember that the consular sections are dealing with all of this confusion as well, and they must receive clear guidance from the State Department on how to implement all of these new requirements. So it may take a little while for them to adjust and get used to this. So you may hear reports about not every overseas post doing things the exact same way right now, but that's only because the State Department is having to grapple with all of these changes and make sure that the same instructions are sent out and that posts are all doing things the same way.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, very much.
Well, my pleasure. I wish I could give more solid answers and provide a lot more clarification than I've been able to today, but hopefully over the next few weeks, it'll become more apparent about how things are working.
Well, we appreciate it nonetheless. Thanks again. We'll see you in class. Thank you for watching. See you next time.